So again, we are actually going to talk about the end of World War I after it was over and what ends up happening. So again, peace at Paris. Yay, there's a peace conference at Paris in early 1919. And you can see the dates here. Again, we said this, but Wilson wants to create this League of Nations. 42 members join. Article 10 basically says that they're going to protect each other, and that the League's jurisdiction is going to basically exclude any domestic affairs. So that you have to protect each person that's in the League of Nations. You have to do all this stuff, but basically that you're kind of self-determined, that there's no restrictions on what you can do with your own people in your own country, with your own resources. And a lot of people didn't like that, particularly Congress, and they did not want Germany to be self-determined. And so the U.S. decides they're not going to join this, mostly because, they don't want to give up the right to go to war. And so Wilson is going to continue to fight and try and get this to be pushed through. But as we saw at the end of last lecture, that he had that quote that basically, if the nations of the world don't come together and decide not to have another war and work really hard at it, we're going to have another war within a generation. And he basically, that's prophecy, dadgum near, because within a generation, within 30 years, 25 years, they're back at it again. Because not all nations bought into this idea of, trying to come together and work it out and figure out their differences in a way that didn't require, shooting each other in the face. The Germans, they, agreed to end the war because of Wilson's 14-point plan. And so Germany is asked to shrink the size of their own navy and the nation. Like, they had taken some land from France, they had to give it back. They had taken land from Poland, they had to give it back. They had taken land from Austria, they had to give it back. They also couldn't have a very big army. There was a limitation on how big their ships could be. And so, and that was kind of a crazy number. Like, they were like, hey, you can have a navy, but you can't have any boats that weigh over 200,000 tons or 2,000 tons or something like that, that's a small boat. Like, basically, you can have boats, but, they can't, be bigger than a yacht. That can be your navy, right? Like, it's a joke. And so, really, they're going to have to be the ones that get the brunt of being punished because of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, the 14 points that Wilson had put out, it's worth taking some time to go through them. This is why Germany agreed to end the fighting anyways. They had read these 14 points, and they were like, if Woodrow Wilson's in charge of this, I think we'll get a pretty fair shake at this. Otherwise, they would have just kept fighting. So they buy into the 14 points. But if you look over here, of the 14 that were proposed, only 3 of them actually got carried out. So Germany really, at the end of this, felt like they got duped, that they got talked into giving up under a certain promise, and that then they changed the rules on them, right? Which is going to leave Germany very bitter and open them up to, the rise of someone like Adolf Hitler within 20 years, right? But, open covenants of peace that are openly arrived at, absolute freedom of navigation on the seas in peace and war, right? Remove economic barriers to the equality of trade among nations. So, free trade between nations that are in this League of Nations. Reduction of armaments to the level needed only for domestic safety, right? That seems reasonable that, hey, if every country just had an army big enough to protect its citizens in case of big, riots or something like that. If your army was only big enough to protect your citizens in domestic affairs, nobody's army would be big enough to go to war with each other, which is 100% true, right? Think if every country in the world just had 20,000 people in their army, and they evenly spaced them out throughout their country just in case something crazy happened, like you have some anarchists or some terrorists within your own country, nobody would go to war because nobody would have enough weapons to go to war, right? It's a good plan. I mean, It's a pipe dream, but it's a good plan. Impartial adjustments of colonial claims, like, hey, give up some of your colonies and let some of these people be free. England's like, ain't doing that. France is like, nope, not going to happen. Evacuation of Russian territory, and that Russia is going to be welcomed into the Society of Free Nations. Nope, not going to do that either. So a lot of these things, these get compromised on. Some of these, like evacuation of Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, free access to the sea for Serbia. Some of these things kind of work out, but for the most part, they don't. The Middle East is going to be carved up into trusteeships, and obviously this puts a lot of blame on Germany, but what's going to cause a lot of World War II and some of the problems in the Middle East today is what ends up happening here, which is that the imperial powers are going to fight over access to the Middle East. They, instead of creating fewer colonies and freeing people to have their own countries, the European powers of France and England decide, no, we're going to make even more colonies. They're going to take advantage of the Middle East. Because guess what's in the Middle East? Oil. They find oil in the Middle East. And all of a sudden, the European countries are like, oh, we got to get some of that. And so they actually start divvying those up. It's very Eurocentric. France gets Lebanon and Syria. England gets Iraq and Palestine, which then after World War II, there is no Palestine. So, and so basically, what happened? The building blocks of the Second World War are really going to be kind of laid on the table during this time. Now, if you bring the U.S. back, here's a really, there's a really powerful disillusion impact psychologically. Remember World War I, people thought that they were making progress, right? All these new industries are being created, they're booming, and jobs are being created, and new, better jobs, and people are fighting for their rights of workers, and women are out in the workforce, they're going to get the right to vote, and in a year or two, there's this idea that, we're making all this progress, and, women, and there's optimism about human nature. And then World War I happens, and you go and you send men over there, and they come back with these realities that are unbelievable, just the realities of trench warfare and some of the terrible things that they saw. And they kind of come back, and they look at all these new inventions and technologies that they had thought, America's got all these weapons, and then they go see what those weapons are capable of, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's bad. Oh, we shouldn't do that. What have we done? What have we created? I imagine it's the same kind of feeling that we got after we set off the first atom bomb, where we were like, oh, we knew that was going to be a big bang, but what have we done, right? This is kind of how this is going after World War I, and a lot of accounts from soldiers during World War I are kind of leaning in that direction of like, oh my gosh, like psychological damage. Now, we also ruin global economies because so much debt is incurred by the Allies and the Central Powers. No matter what side you were on, you had so much debt to pay off. The U.S. is actually one of the few places who doesn't really have debt because for most of the war, we were the ones selling stuff to people, right? But for the rest of the world, it's very, very scary times economically. And you're going to start seeing revolutions start to pop up all over the globe because these countries that are subjected to, England and France and Germany and all these countries, their colonies are going to realize like, oh, they're devastated from this world war. Now's our chance to rise up, right? It's our chance to rise up and overthrow these people and take our country back. And you start seeing a lot of that during this time. In Russia, you have the communists that are going to rise up in what's known as the Bolshevik Revolution. And of course, that's going to end up becoming the Red Scare in the U.S., during the 40s and 50s and stuff. It'd be nice if, World War I ends and everything just goes back to normal, but that is not how that ends up playing out. And so very, very important to kind of understand that, we want to suppress any kind of ideas of revolution in the United States. Then you kind of have to reiterate the best leader of the time, Woodrow Wilson, who's kind of brought the world out of World War I and has this 14-point plan just in time to kind of make a big impact, has a stroke and has to pull back from the public spotlight. He's too impaired to be able to do anything helpful. And so in the next election, the Democrats are going to pick a guy from Ohio named James Cox. And the Republicans are going to pick a guy named Warren G. Harding. And Warren G. Harding is going to pick a guy named Calvin Coolidge. And they end up winning. And so Harding runs on, normalcy and, hey, we're going to get back, things are going to return to normal. The public has kind of felt abandoned by Wilson because he kind of withdraws right at the time that people want to see more of him. And he could provide this calming influence to people, but now he can't be around, so people are like, oh, he just left us high and dry. And so it's kind of important to understand that just at the wrong time, he has this stroke. And eventually Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, and then Harding doesn't make it very long. So I think he has the shortest presidency ever, doesn't he, Warren G. Harding? I think that's right. I could be wrong. Does Harding make it all the way through his presidency? I don't think he does. Maybe he does. I can't remember. The shortest? Yeah, he only makes it like 3 weeks, doesn't he? 31 days. No, that's different. Harding made it all the way through. I'm wrong. Harding makes it, and then Coolidge gets elected after him. I got lots of presidents. Yeah, he makes it the whole time. No. 2.5 years? Yeah, he doesn't make it the whole time, though, right? Does he get shot? He just dies. Yeah. I know he didn't make it the whole way. I just got him and the other guy, Harrison, mixed up. All right. Anyways, we're going to rewind now, talk about the Communist Revolution. You need to understand what's going on there, just to kind of get a context for World War II. The Bolsheviks, the communists, are going to rise up, led by a guy named Vladimir Lenin. He pledges to get Russia out of the war in 1917 and then removes them from the war. And starts the full-on communist revolution over there. He goes in. He's the one who they go in and kill Tsar Nicholas II. They remove him from power, and then that's the guy who they're like, hey, we're gonna go take a family photo, and him and his wife and all of his daughters and kids get dressed up in really nice dresses and stuff, and they take him down into the basement, and they're like, all right, family photo time for the portrait. And then they close the door and just gun them down. Yeah. Yeah, cold-blooded, bruh. And so Russia kind of has this idea that hey, we're going to get out of the war. We're going to go do our own thing. And so you have this communist revolution really taking over. It's pretty rough. So you need to understand that that's kind of what's happening in Russia. At the time, they removed Nicholas from power and all that. So, muy importante. So then you end up with, in April of 1919, you have the Red Scare. Now, part of the Red Scare is kind of referring to the Communist Revolution. The Communist Party is it's got a red symbol. The Soviet the flag has the sickle and all that stuff, right? The hammer and sickle. And so it becomes the Red Scare. And so in April of 1919, the post office discovered bombs that were actually being mailed to prominent Americans. J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. And overall, the investigation discovers that there were actually 34 bombs that had been put in the mail to prominent Americans. And the question becomes, well, who sent them? So Attorney General Mitchell Palmer organizes a massive crackdown trying to find anybody in the government associated with anarchists or communists or socialists or any other radical organization. And they end up having to create a new kind of police force and a new investigative unit within the Justice Department in order to try and find these people. Where did this come from? And so they give unprecedented policing powers to a young man named J. Edgar Hoover. And he is going to head this new department of the Justice Department that is like a police force. It's going to be the most preeminent police force in the entire world. And it's their job. Well, obviously, J. Edgar Hoover is going to end up, this organization is going to turn into the FBI. And J. Edgar Hoover was the lead of the FBI for a long time. And the FBI building in Washington is called the J. Edgar Hoover Building. And so part of this, and you have Palmer, who is going to raid hundreds of people and arrest almost 5,000 people who they say are associated with these different movements. Several hundred of them are deported without trial. They just kick them out of the United States, but they never find any explosives in any of these raids. They got nothing. So where did these 34 bombs come from? Where could they have come from? Well, the government wants to return to normalcy. The way to return to normalcy is to make sure there's no extremists in America. Who would have been interested in making sure there was something that scared people enough to allow a new policing organization to get rid of people who would jeopardize normalcy? Oh, the government. Isn't that weird? Not that we would ever think that they would do that, like the Zimmerman Telegraph or anything like that, or Cuba. Our government was on a hot streak, guys, of just lying. I have no evidence. This is completely conspiracy theory on my part, but I'm just saying they never found anything. They had the full weight of the United States government. Found nothing. But yet they had found 34 bombs randomly in packages when they weren't even looking for bombs. But then when they were looking for bombs, they arrested 5,000 people and found no bombs. Interesting. No. But at any rate, there you go. You have unrest and angst. And here you can kind of see, here's World War I, that, the communists are really trying to put their ideas out there. And this is a pamphlet that, they're trying to talk bad against capitalism. They're saying capitalism is bad, communism's better, and they're pushing these out there. And you see down here, it's like, this is the pyramid of capitalism. This is like the poor people and the peasants. Oh, we feed all of you. And then you kind of have the rich people, and it says, we eat for you. Like, we eat what all these people are growing. We work for all. We feed all. We eat for you. We shoot at you, the army. This is religion. We fool you. The kings, we rule you. And at the top, this is capitalism. At the top is all the money. And they're basically saying the peasants hold the whole pyramid up and they get nothing. They get crushed by the weight of all of it. And all the people at the top use all these methods to control them, right? While the rich people just enjoy life. They're saying that's how capitalism works. But in reality, that's kind of how communism works, actually. In reality, anytime we've seen communism play out, it typically ends up kind of like this. Much more than capitalism does. But there you go. They were passing these out in large numbers. Like they're peppering everyone, trying to get them to join the Communist Party. And again, we start confiscating their literature and getting rid of it, which is a big pile of books that they're getting ready to burn. You don't ever want to be on the side of burning books. I'm just saying, I don't care what's in the books. You don't have to agree with them. You can, but if you're on the side of burning books, you're probably on the wrong side. Freedom of speech means freedom of speech. I'm sorry. You have to kind of be an absolutist on this to some extent. And they're like, no, this is bad for America. Okay, then it's bad for America. How about this, America? How about you do a better job of selling what you're selling? How about you do a better job of convincing people that you're right by showing them how your system is better instead of, limiting what they can read and burning books? That's a bad idea, right? Now, after you have this terrible war where 15 million people have died, pretty much instantly we have the deadliest epidemic in the history of the world. Far more deadly than the Black Death of the 14th century. About 1/5 of the world's population was infected at this point, and an estimated 20 to 40 million people died globally. That's a lot. 28% of Americans were infected, and 700,000 people died during this time, during this Spanish flu, right? And people thought, oh, COVID's going to be the same. COVID was not the same. COVID pretty much targeted elderly and people with pre-existing conditions, and that's mostly who died. Not Spanish influenza. The Spanish influenza was particularly deadly to 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, like young, healthy people and kids. Like it targeted, it was like the opposite of COVID. Like, killing people in the prime of their lives. I mean, you're talking about, which is even worse since you have a global war that just killed 15 million people from their 20s to 40s. Now you're going to follow that up with even more death. And then 20 years later, even more death, which is crazy. The Journal of American Medical Association, 1918 has gone, a year momentous as the termination of the most cruel war in the annals of human race, a year which marked at the end, at least for a time, the man's destruction of man. Unfortunately, a year in which developed a most fatal infectious disease, causing the death of hundreds of thousands of human beings. Medical science, for 4.5 years, devoted itself to putting men on the firing line and keeping them there. Now it must turn its whole might to combating the greatest enemy of all, infectious disease. And it was really, really bad. I mean, it was awful. Children came up with rhymes at the time. I had a little bird, her name was Enza, opened the door and influenza. That's sad. Anyways, look, even back then, 1919, here's some baseball, right? They're playing with masks on. They were wearing masks back then too. Crazy. It's super weird. And that takes us to section 6.